Hey FCBC, it's Pastor Mike, and it is TNT, Tuesday Night Takeover with The Journey. But before we get into the interview, make sure you follow us on Journey TV Live. That's at Journey TV Live on social media. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy The Journey. Peace and blessings, family.
Joining us on The Journey today is a world-renowned chef and restaurateur. Please welcome to The Journey, Marcus Samuelsson.
Thank you. Thank you.
Listen, I'm excited about this. I've always been impressed, man, with your work and what you do and the impact you've had. Here's why I like The Journey, because people know of you. They know the restaurant. They know you're one of the best chefs in the world. Yeah. And I'm a fan because I like watching you on Chopped.
Yeah, thank you.
As a judge, right?
Yeah.
Because one day I'm going to be on Chopped.
You will definitely be on Chopped. We can make that happen. I know people that know people.
Now, first I got to cook. Yeah. I'm going to get my culinary skills up to par.
But see, I believe you can because you're Bayesian.
Come on,
man. And we know there is a place, if you've ever been to Barbados, there is Friday night at the Oystons. You know, it's basically the Apollo and a food fest all in one.
That, if you ever been to Barbados, you go to Friday night to Oystons and you will get some of the best food in the world there. But I'm gonna get on Chopped, but, because I'm gonna get on there. Cause I never really watched the Food Network before, maybe a year and a half ago, and I started one night flipping through channels. And man, I got hooked on Chopped. I mean, when it's on, I'm binging Chopped.
Yeah.
And it's deep. And that what I realized though, I made a classical mistake. I made a mistake during Lent when we were supposed to not eat after 7.
Don't put that on Chopped.
Listen, and I was watching Chopped after 7.
Yeah.
It didn't really work out well because I got hungry. Because you can't watch that show without getting hungry, right? You were born in Ethiopia.
Yeah.
And some people may know your background, but I want people here to know your background because the point of the journey is to help people see. We see your success. We see what you've done. The books, the state dinners at the White House, the restaurants. And everybody doesn't know what you've gone through to get where you are right now. Like, born in Ethiopia and then take it from there.
Yeah, so sometimes, and this is something that a lot of people struggle with, sometimes when the worst things is happening to you, it could also be a point of strength, right? So my mother passed away when we were 2, but she did walk us to a hospital in Addis.
Wow.
We survived tuberculosis, she passed, me and my sister. But I'm also here because the goodness of others and also luck. I would never want to take out those 2 ingredients. The goodness of others happens always in life. If you do well, other people will come out and help you. In our case, the nurse in the hospital, she had 3 kids. There was 5,000 kids in the hospital, in the community there, right? But she said, I'm not gonna let these 2 kids be homeless. So she took us in, right?
Wow.
So
in Ethiopia.
In Ethiopia. And then she got us to an adoption center. It took 3 to 5 months to get us to a Swedish adoption center, and then eventually we got adopted. But just that idea that nurse with already 3 of her own kids took us in. That's just pure that's
God.
That's
great.
God.
That's great.
Exactly.
That's great.
We get adopted to Sweden, and I always say that, diversity, this room is extremely diverse, and Harlem is a diverse place. And I think my dinner table prepared me for this moment. So me and my sister's Black, my other sister's mixed from Jamaica, my parents are white, my cousins are Korean, my auntie is Jewish, right? But that's a mini New York, circa 1983 in Gothenburg, Sweden.
Yeah.
So it's all about the preparation, right, for this moment. And I've also been an immigrant 6 times. So at a very early part of my life, when I decided to become a chef, Again, the blessed thing of being a young black man is that if we're going to be excellent, we have to be the very best and even better than that.
That's right.
Because it's otherwise, the scholarships that are there for us
Yeah.
might not be there for us.
Yeah.
And I was fortunate enough to win a lot of scholarships. So I lived in France, I lived in Switzerland. So when I think about this moment where where we are being challenged as people of color, as immigrants are being challenged, I'm like, I've seen this movie before and I'm prepared.
Yeah, yeah. A couple of things you said, Marcus. One, and I want to pull that back because the idea, as you named the family you grew up in,
Yeah.
it was a diverse family. It's almost absurd to me that we're in a moment where people don't honor diversity in this country. We claim to be the melting pot, well, New York is for sure, and we tell people that we want to welcome people from around the world, and
Yes.
now all of a sudden there's this temperament in this culture that says, no, we don't want anybody else. Now, mind you, everyone who's here came here
Came from
somehow.
somewhere. Yes.
Right? And the ones who were here before, the land was taken, they were conquered, and that's a tragic story. I'm just amazed in this moment. But when I hear immigrants, my family were immigrants when they came here from Barbados. And so I know of that struggle, and I think about what would it have been like if we didn't have that opportunity to come here. Where would I be if we didn't have the opportunity? But understanding the need for diversity and tolerance, which seems to be at a premium right now, right?
Yeah.
And it's something that we have to begin to really think about. And so when I see someone like you come here and all the opportunities you had, as you said, combined with God's grace,
Yes, of course.
the blessings of God, to go from being born in a hut to now on the Food Network, Red Rooster, all the other restaurants you have, is a testimony not just to your ability, but there was some unseen hand moving at the same time, right? Because you think about the hospital, 5,000 kids, but you come out of your sister, and you're raised in a household. So somewhere along the line, there was a hand moving, guiding you every step of the way.
Spirituality, you can never take out spirituality out of my journey. Absolutely not. My father in Ethiopia that I met as an adult man was an Orthodox priest.
Wow. You said when you met him, how old were you when you met him?
I was 25 when we found him.
And he's a priest?
He just passed away last year at 91. He was an Orthodox priest, and he had a long journey. He had a tough journey, a long journey, but we were able to reconnect with his new family. And over the last 12 years, me and my wife have been able to mentor and put to school 8 of his children, for example. So now they still have the hut, but they're also all are educated, they're all in school right now, out of school, doing really, really well. So we've been able to contribute and participate and learn about my identity, because when you're adopted, yes, maybe financially and school-wise you can do a little bit better, but culturally you're still ripped away from something that is part of you. So being able to see them has given me a lot of my identity back.
Yeah. But think about that. It is pretty amazing that you just said, now here's your father who you didn't really know. You met at 25 and you found out that you had siblings. Right? And was that traumatizing in any way, shape, or form, meeting your father?
For me and my sister, it was amazing. But yes, it was draining, it was hard. But I know it would have been harder of standing on the sideline and knowing that I knew them and didn't do anything.
That's powerful. I mean, because I know, I've spoken to people who've gone through this, and a really good friend of mine actually tried to connect with his biological parents. It didn't go so well, and I remember him calling me. He was devastated, and he's a pastor, he counsels people, but it was still devastating to him. But to think that in the midst of all that, instead of being bitter, you decide to help your siblings, right? And to make sure they all got an education. And to me, that's the power. It speaks to who you are as a human being. Because it makes no sense to go through this life holding grudges at all. And we all have reasons we can be angry, reasons we can be upset. But the whole grudges diminishes our humanity. To be mad at people. And the deep thing is sometimes we're mad at people who've gotten over what we were mad about a long time ago. And we're the only ones sitting there mad now, right? And instead of doing that, you turn that around and use that to be a source of inspiration for your brothers and sisters, right?
Well, I've been also fortunate enough to have, Harlem for me is a place for my aspirations. My living in Sweden, it wasn't a lot of black, when we needed to look at black inspirational figures, my parents gave me James Baldwin, Malcolm X book, in Maya Angelou. We were listening to music from the Apollo. So Harlem always became this place of aspiration. So it was very clear to me when I moved to America that I needed to come to Harlem. And I say that because people all over the world that are inspired to come to Harlem, they're inspired to be part of this community here. And I think that food has been, spirituality is your journey, food is my journey, but I also teach a lot about eating with a spiritual compass. This is the most important thing each person can actually take home and do. Understanding what does eating with a spiritual compass mean, right? Yeah. I break this down to everybody can have their own different spirituality, but it means that at a big feast, at that barbecue cookout, I don't go up and take 3 plates maybe. I make sure that I might take something home and give to the neighbor that might not have as much. It means that we're thinking about our diet in terms of lowering our protein and our fat intake.
No, that's right.
It means that, you know what I mean? And it means sometimes we might fast, and it's got to be our own guidelines. So eating with a spiritual compass. So our journeys are very much linked.
The reason why I like what you just said is because what most people don't realize, you take the church, for example, the historical framing of the church. In the early church after Jesus, when they were being persecuted, they could never meet openly, right?
Yeah.
They could not gather, they could not be, after the death of Jesus, could not be talking about Jesus in public. And what they decided to do was to find a way that they could build community. And they decided they would talk about Jesus and share the stories over meals. And so the early community came together around meals because if those who were trying to persecute them would find them, they could always say that they were eating and not spreading the news.
Sure.
And so in many ways, eating was at the heart of the founding of the early church, learning how to sit together, to break bread together. I tell people sometimes one of the most vulnerable moments you'll have is to sit down and eat with another human being and be transparent. And we've lost that, especially in the age of fast food. The idea of sitting with another person, talking and sharing stories is the most powerful thing. I imagine in your restaurant, that's all you hear, stories all day long.
But first of all, does anyone know what the word restaurant actually means?
Yeah, spend a lot of money.
The word restaurant means to restore your community. And what happens at a place like Red Rooster and why in Harlem? So it's 5,000 customers coming a week, 165 people work there, plus 70 musicians. So it's about 250 people that call it workplace, right? So that could be the drummer, it could be the chef, it could be the marketing director, it could be the server, it could be the dishwasher. So that is the person who does the flowers. So we're restoring by creating jobs in and of this community. The other way we restore it, just like this church is, for people that come to this community, it also creates a level of normalcy. We're not on the bus, getting off the bus, taking pictures, leaving. We can be on that bus, we can get off it, but then I'm gonna stop by church. I'm also gonna have a meal, and I'm gonna look around and look at people that may look different like me, but they're just eating and enjoying each other. So if we live in a time where governments are not gonna create a level of normalcy and humanity, it's just not gonna happen. No. So what do we have left? We have community that have to actually take upon it themselves and create normalcy. And it will always come back to churches and spiritual institutions and cultural institutions such as restaurants.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it, man. I love it. So every journey guest, we have to ask him, give us 3 things that you've learned along your journey that you think would benefit those of us who are here today.
Well, I think that we touched on some of them, but break bread with a stranger, right? Invite someone to your home or go to their place, because it's not just a meal. That meal is a conversation opener to why, right? Then the second thing I would say is pray with a stranger. I was just lucky enough to be part of a temple and just to learn, actually when you pray, it's very personal. So I was at a Krishna temple, but I prayed the same as I would have done in a church, right?
Yeah.
But just, it sounded a little bit different. The music were a little bit different, But my desire of learning and humility is exactly the same. So I would say that too. Like, if you have the opportunity, if you've never been put in that position, whether that's a mosque, a temple, or a church, it doesn't matter. It's just it humbles you, and like you're leaving there like understanding the other side a little bit more.
Yes, absolutely.
And then the last thing I think is celebrate your family and your extended family more often, because my family just went through. I lost my mother last year, and I'm at an age now where you lose your uncles and your parents and so on. And I wish, one of the last great memories I have with my mother, actually, she loved coming to Harlem, and we came here. She loved sitting on the second row because there's a better view on the up there. And she loved walking over here, and we always talked about how big the boulevards were. It's like a 10-minute walk for me and my mom. We came here, and we were arguing which was the best way to go to church here. And I wish I could still argue with my mother.
Wow.
I wish I could argue with her. So celebrate each other. Don't take each other for granted. Love one another. You know what I mean? So those are the three things that I've learned.
Break bread.
Yes.
Pray.
And
celebrate the gift of family.
Yes. And it's going to smell, and it's going to taste different. It's going to sound different. It's all wonderful.
Come on, give it up for Marcus Samuelsson.
Thanks,
bro. Hey, FCBC family, I hope you enjoyed the episode of The Journey where I interviewed world-renowned chef, entrepreneur, friend, brother, Marcus Samuelsson, and we are here with Marcus for the check-in. So Marcus, how have things been since The Journey, which was now 2 years ago? It seems like it was shorter, but 2 years ago.
Sure. We good. My family's healthy. My son is running around, he's growing. So he just had his birthday. So yeah, things are good. It's this new normal that teaching me and my family a lot about being grateful to have each other, being grateful to have an argument, being grateful to staying healthy,
Yeah. How old is your son now?
He's 4. And, so the pandemic is, in the beginning it was rough. Like when school stopped, and doing school on Zoom when you're 3.5, it's not a good thing. You mean, you're just getting to know your friends, you're getting excited about being social, and then all of that just gets ripped away. So that was tough, but he's used to it now, and I guess this is the new normal.
Yeah. How well, I know how things have been, but how have you been dealing on professionally in terms of restaurants?
Well, Pastor, I got to this country, I always look at through the lens of the journey, the blessings of being a Black man, and the blessings of being an immigrant. I came here with $300, and I came here really because all the work that people like, Congressman John Lewis, and in my field, people like Sylvia Woods and Leah Chase. So the generation before us that really through civil rights. And I came here with very little money, but with the idea of I wanted to add value and work.
Yeah.
And we worked for 25 years, and it took 10 days to break it all down, right? 25 years to build up and 10 days to break it all down. But what it didn't do, it didn't take away our worth and our work ethic.
Yeah.
So yes, we have less restaurants and we employ less people, which hurts because the more people we employ, the more people can help. But the work and the work ethic is there. So pretty quickly in March, we turned this around. We turned Red Rooster into community kitchen right away.
Good.
So I have new regulars. We're serving about 1,200 people a day.
Wow.
And we've been doing that since March, and it's end of July now. So we reached about 200,000 meals.
Wow. Wow.
We're doing the work. It's just instead of having regulars like yourself and Thelma Golden and the Apollo board, which is all amazing people to have. Our regulars are the most neediest and the first responders, and it's meaningful work. It's just different work.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think, of course, in a city like New York, where so much is based on hospitality and entertainment and restaurants, to see how New York has been impacted by this pandemic, and in your industry in particular, has been amazing to see. But as you said, the powerful thing, and I've learned this in this time, is to be kind of agile, right? To have the ability to switch and shift. And as you said, the most important thing for you, which you just shared with me, is not only did you kind of shift, but you also added value to those who were in need.
Yeah.
And I think the easiest thing to do in this season is to think about, well, what do I need and what do I have to have? But when you shift this and turn it about, what do those who are essential workers or those who are struggling need? I think that's commendable to you. And it says a lot about who you are, not just in terms of what you do, but who you are as a human being. And in this time, I think our humanity is what has to rise to the forefront in many ways.
Yeah.
How has it been for you just navigating, when this first happened, even up to now, just navigating the city and seeing how the city was? How was that for you?
Well, I think we're all struggling, and it's okay to admit that. And I think that's one of the first steps. There are days where I wake up and I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
Tough.
Yeah.
And I'm a very, very positive, jump
Yeah.
out of bed type of person.
Yeah.
I've never seen a workload that we can't work through or we can't work together. When we close or something, we have to wait a little bit or sit on the sideline. I think about the line cook that was just coming, was just to apply to work for us.
Yeah.
I think about the server that, or the bartender that just got healthcare or just reached middle class, or, you know what I mean? Like, this is, Red Rooster employs 180 people and 70 musicians. And then you take in Montreal, Canada, about 150 people. And then in London, about 90 people. And so it goes on. The tree goes on and on. So I think about that. I've done a couple of things. I had to process and document this because I always see it about, how am I going to tell my son this when he's 15? So for me, it was important to document. So I started a podcast called This Moment, right? Where we talk, me and my friend Jason Diakate. He happens to be African-American, but he lives in Sweden, and me being Swedish living here. So he also raises a little one. So we talk about being fathers during this pandemic. We talk about being two creatives. He's a rapper, so he can't do any tours. I'm a chef, and I normally have a full restaurant. So how do we as two creatives go through this? So I've taken a lot of time working on my creativity. I'm finishing my book. It's called The Rise, which is a book about African-American excellence into American cooking. How come we are not acknowledged in the field that we really created the most?
Yeah.
So those two pieces have been important for me to create a regular. I'm going to work, I'm working on my book, I'm working on my podcast. And then I can go back and maybe take my son out for a bike ride or something like that, right? So have had my family around me has been very, very important for me in order to create what I need. And you may or may not know this, but my father was an Orthodox priest. My sister's brother, the Catholic priest, and my sister's and my wife's brother is a Catholic priest, and my wife's sister is a nun, and she lives with us. So we talk a lot about the spiritual community in Ethiopia. So when the pandemic happened, how do you Ethiopia really worked a lot through in terms of closing down the churches, but also then still communicating. And how do you do it in a country like Ethiopia? So things like that is not directly my core work, but communication and gatherings is obviously something I've learned a lot about. So just going into different fields and working with the family around spirituality has been helpful too.
Yeah. On another, you started by talking about who you were, how you came to this country as an immigrant, as a Black man in this country. How have How have you felt about what has been happening the past several months with the protests and the movement and the kind of resistance to the police brutality and the institutional racism, which at the end of the day is woven into the fabric of this country, right?
Yeah.
So how has that impacted you in your perspective?
Well, I, you know, it's funny we talk about it today with just the passing of John Lewis, right? And one of my icons was Miss Leah Chase, that she
Yeah.
essentially broke the law every day for 20 years. Her restaurant opened in the 40s in the New Orleans, and she served black and white people way before it was legal.
Yeah.
And I say that because sometimes you just have to break the law in order to do what makes sense.
Yeah.
And black people in this country, we know that more than anyone.
Yeah.
And right now is one of those uprising moments where you have to create change. So it's been very, very powerful to watch this spring. It's just so sad that it has to be over something like, the 846 of the murder of George Floyd. I don't think I can ever erase that. And maybe I should never, maybe no, we never should erase that. Maybe that's why it happened. The
No.
Breonna Taylors, the Ahmaud, and even to the point of the Chris Cooper and Amy Cooper in the park, right?
Mhm.
Because it was that silent of, we have two different ways of getting out of this situation, and I'm going to use my privilege to create another narrative to get you.
Yeah.
And it happened, and these 3-4 things just happened right in front of us. And it's funny how he works sometimes, right? It was just pop, 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 pop.
Yeah.
And that's also why I think the world is changing, right? It was not New York, LA, San Francisco, Minneapolis, 2,000 cities around the country and around the world.
Yeah.
And it's just a shame that it has to happen that way,
I've shared, I was on a panel one time, and, in this country, they have a tendency to refer to racism and slavery in particular as America's original sin. And I've never used that language in referring to this, primarily because depending on your religious sensibilities, sin can be assuaged very easily, right? You say, I'm sorry, or you ask for forgiveness. And I've always talked about this as America's primary addiction, that
Wow.
that white supremacy and the myth of racial superiority predates the founding of the country. At the moment the first slave comes on these shores in 1619, you have the beginning of myth making about racial superiority. That's an addiction. And I think one of the things that we have to do is treat it as such. I think we treat it.
Fascinating. I've never heard it that way. That's fascinating. I love that.
Yeah, most folks don't look at it, but they always look at the sin, but an addiction cannot be overcome just by saying, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It cannot be overcome by just going to the people you've damaged and saying, I'm sorry. It has to be a commitment on the part of those who are addicted to commit to their own healing and transformation. That's what has to happen. We often have conversation after conversation in this country. We face these episodes, every year, whether it's 5, 6, 7, 10 episodes like this, and yet we find ourselves always back at the same space because it is not just a sin. It is an addiction. It is woven into the fabric of this country. And unless our country faces that, we'll always find ourselves in this space. I am hopeful, as you are, in this moment, because of how it has become a global recognition this moment. I want to ask you one question. You're a businessman as well, and this has to do with that. How do you feel when you see predominantly white corporations now almost co-opting the narrative? And I know it's being done for the bottom line, and they feel that they've done enough by saying Black Lives Matter or marching, but there's no commitment to systemic change. How do when you see that happen, it is happening, how does that strike you?
Well, Pastor Mike, I think this has to be acknowledged in layers.
Yeah.
You see it in many other communities. You think about LGBTQ, and you think about how the flag very often is pushed out when it comes to pride. And then people go back to completely biased laws.
Absolutely.
how they operate within their own company. We cannot also be used in that way. So I think that the first step was denial. The second step is, okay, let's put a Black Lives Matter statement in out, and then we go back to what we were doing. So, it's America. We're on a journey,
Yeah.
and that's why this is going to go through different steps. And on November we got to vote. On November we have to vote. If we don't vote and say all this stuff, what was this for? Because where change is going to happen, it's going to be in the voting booth.
Yeah.
And once that's done, we can really start, changing real laws, right? And there's been some changes through George Floyd and Breonna Taylor laws. But if you want a real systemic change, and then you also have the generation of Obama's kids, all the people that were in high school or middle school when the first lady was Michelle Obama and Barack Obama was at the White House. So their narrative of our race is very, very different. They grew up with a Black president or Black first lady, and they're ready to be taught and go on a journey and are open, and they're going to talk about it on social media. And that's why I think there is hope, because this is multi-international, it's multi-layered, it's documented. So I think I'm very, very hopeful about the young ones. There's hope,
Yeah. No, I like what you said. I think, well, coincidentally, it is a journey, right? So, and it is a journey, I think, in which we continually evolve. And as you said, the hope is that there's a commitment to learn. I mean, you talk about John Lewis. John Lewis once said that if voting wasn't critical, why would they spend so much time trying to take the right to vote away from us? And I try to educate people around that at the same time. Voting is not a weakness, it's a strength. You don't attack an enemy at the point of weakness, you attack the strength. And our capacity to vote has been under attack from the very time the opportunity to vote was made.
Sure.
So you're absolutely right. I think translating the activism and the protests into sustained engagement and legislative change has to be the end goal. If that doesn't happen, then I always tell people, you don't want to just be able to publicly vent. You want to be able to engage in a kind of transformational work that shifts the narrative, as you says, and changes laws. When I know this season has been tough for everyone. What do you personally do, other than your family, to kind of ground yourself and not lose yourself in the challenge of this season?
Well, I speak to my family a lot, both in Africa and in Sweden. Mm-hmm. And in Ethiopia right now, we're going through tough time. Part of it because of the pandemic, and part of it because there's just been tough times in Africa, and the pandemic is part of it. But there's some tribal issues and so on. So speaking to your family gets you a perspective on it. And they're very different. In Sweden, it's like this never happened, right? Yeah. And I'm connected to both.
Yeah, that's true.
Because in Sweden, it impacted mostly the elderly community, from 75 and up. So getting these very different perspectives, very different realities, and then living our own here. But it's been important to, when you have a little one like 4, we have so much work to do that is non-pandemic. It's just around everyday learning and feeding his curiosity. And that's been something to hold on to.
Yeah.
Right. But also been around having more families staying with us at home, because there were traveling bans and so on, has also been nice, because you come home to a house where everybody's going through this, and people can be at bit different stages. So it's not just this sort of like dead on work situation and I'm on a plane off and, going somewhere else. No, we're all staying at home.
Yeah.
So it's been a very busy moment, but also a moment of pause and reflection.
Yeah.
And that's why I think doing my podcast, finishing the book, it's still work, but it's a work that you have to reflect in order to do it well.
Got you. I want to remind, in the interview, I've looked at our interview since we did it, and for me, a lot has changed. I don't know if you know, not too long afterwards, I had a massive stroke.
Yeah.
Yeah, and which changed my whole view and perspective, and my recovery. For me, I'm grateful for it because still some issues. But in our interview, you said something that was just amazing. I mean, we go to restaurants all the time. We go out and eat, and now I'm sure we realize that we can take those moments for granted. But you shared something in the interview, and you talked about restaurants are about restoring community, right? How do you imagine that work of restoration looks now in communities like ours? And given your place and position, what does that restoration in this moment look like?
Yeah. Well, Pastor, I think that humility is part of it, right? And I think two things. One of the reasons why I opened in Harlem was to shift the conversation between people said to me that Harlem was a food desert. And this woman, amazing activist, Karen Washington, taught me, there's a difference between food deserts and food apartheid.
Hmm.
And I thought about it as an African. I was actually born in the desert, and I know what the desert looked like. In New York City, it doesn't look anything like a desert. There is food. There's food at the deli. That doesn't mean it's healthy food, but this is all is linked back to Jim Crow.
Yeah.
And so creating 180 jobs in hospitality in Harlem, 125 and 6 and Lenox Avenue was meaningful to me, not just as a physical space, but also as a microphone out to the world that we can do this. We can change this trajectory. And with that, it becomes, you shift the foot traffic just like your church does, shift the foot traffic of coming to Harlem, staying in Harlem. We challenging the rest of the community to start more farmers markets.
Yeah.
Farmers markets that are affordable and that you can have different payment system, right? That's our role. We are creating an intersection between aspire and inspire, right? It's a very, very important intersection. And that those two goals can be had in our community. I don't have to leave our community to have those aspiration or be inspired. So all of that for me reflects into restoring, which means what a restaurant really means to do. So those are the core values. And when I think about it from that point of view, it's okay that I'm now asking my wealthy friends to help us invest in us so we can keep serving the neediest community.
Yeah.
That's a good investment. That's a good investment on every level. And, if it means that we are taking pause for a year and a half in our regular work, in the long, I'm in the forever business.
That's it.
So in the long haul, it's just like, I remember when your church was going through renovation. That took more than 18 months. It still didn't mean that it wasn't located on 116, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes real meaningful work takes longer than you want, but it still had its value in the community.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think I agree with that. I think we're not in the build. I tell people, people say, well, Pastor, we're not having church. I say, no, we're not in the building. Church continues. It transcends the building. I think even the work you do, people get so fixated, as you said, of course, it's a restaurant thing about food, but the idea of restoring, shaping, framing, community, being part of reimagining, because at the end of the day, that's what has to happen across this country. But reimagining what our cities and our communities look like and how we begin to work together creatively and make those kinds of investments in the forever visions, right? And in the kind of work that you do. Listen, I am always humbled to talk to you, man, because you're an amazing person, man.
Who are you?
And I admire deeply, and I'm grateful for your presence. And I have to say this before I go, that Harlem is better. The world is better for someone like you, and Harlem is definitely better for someone like you. And to have that passion and commitment for our community means more than you can ever imagine. And to be committed to the struggle of freedom and liberation goes without saying, is part of who we're called to be. not just as Harlemites, not just as Black men, but as human beings. So I thank you for being an amazing human being.
I said we thank you for everything that you do, and the journey on recovery that you are on. It's ongoing, and we pray for you and love you and thank you for everything that you're doing, and keep doing the good work, because we definitely need you and in this community. Thank you, Pastor Mike.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And everybody, FCBC, I want you all just to continue to keep our community in prayer, keep our families in prayer, and remember people like Marcus Samuelsson, who are a vital part of our community, who do and continue to do, even in this season of challenge, amazing work in providing for those who are in need. And so again, Marcus, thank you, my brother. Peace and blessings.
Peace.
And grateful to have you, man.
Thank you so much.
Much love.
Love.
All right.